glass half full or half empty? Favorite Bach sonata or partita? Welcome to another episode of the Whole Note Podcast. My name is Shin-Young Kim, and today we'll be joined by violinist Isabelle Ai Durrenberger. Isabelle is currently a fellow of Carnegie Hall's renowned Ensemble Connect program. She also serves as a violin teacher at the New England Conservatory's preparatory school in Boston. She has participated in international violin competitions all around the world, including the Indianapolis Violin Competition, the Sendai Violin Competition in Japan, and Isangyun Violin Competition in Korea. As a soloist, she has performed with orchestras such as the Naples Philharmonic Orchestra, the Columbus Symphony, the Cleveland Philharmonic Orchestra, and many more. We sat down as she shared with us about her work with Ensemble Connect, her studies with Don Weilerstein and Soovin Kim at the New England Conservatory, her work as a teacher at the NEC Preparatory School, and much more. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you enjoy this episode and would like insight into the lives of other amazing artists, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We hope you enjoy. Thanks. All right, Isabelle, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, it's so good to be here with you, Shin-Young.
Yeah, I'm so excited because actually one of my first impressions of you was my first year in Cleveland, and I think this was your second year of your undergrad studies, and you gave such a convincing performance of the Shostakovich First Violin Concerto, is that right? With the orchestra, and it was I've always just really had tremendous respect for you, and so
that means so much. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I always remember you being one of like the kindest people I knew at CIM. And yeah, it's a small community there, so everyone's energy matters.
Exactly. So I'm really excited to dig into your work currently as a musician. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about your prelude or your earlier years as a musician. So let's go back to the beginning. Can you share with us a little bit about your musical upbringing and how it is that you came to the violin?
Yeah, I like to joke that even pre-birth, I was already surrounded by music because both my parents are pianists. My mom says that she played a lot of Chopin when she was pregnant with me, and I think some Mozart, because that's supposed to be good for babies. And yeah, both my parents teach piano currently, my dad at the college level, and my mom teaches kids like elementary through high school. So I grew up always hearing piano. I remember like sitting underneath the piano kind of when my parents would practice and just kind of stare up at the bottom and listen. And I started on piano when I was probably 4 or 5, and I played, like I practiced seriously until I was 12 years old. And I think, so I started piano at 4. When I was 7, my parents asked me if I'd like to start violin because they said I was really good at singing and I enjoyed it a lot. And they thought, well, violin is closer to singing than piano, and it's a more social instrument. Because as a pianist, you're just alone all the time. But as a violinist, you could at least do youth orchestra and things like that. So I think I took to, I started out on Suzuki. I think I did that for 1 year, and then I switched to the teacher I had for about 4 years before I started studying with Mr. Laredo when I was 13. But yeah, I mean, as a kid, I loved music, but I was very into school as well. I'd say I was a good student. I really enjoyed classes, especially like English and history classes. So I always thought I'd want to double major in like political science or something. But after I met Mr. Laredo when I was 13, that was just an incredible coincidence and one of those random chance things. I'd won my first concerto competition in Columbus, and I was going to be playing with the New Albany Symphony Orchestra in Ohio, just the first movement of the concerto. And I was, I think, 12 when I did the competition, and I would be 13 when I had to play with the orchestra. And I remember when I got the news, like my mom opened the email where it said I won, and I burst out crying because I was really scared. I was like, I have to play in front of that many people. But it ended up being a really positive experience. And that same spring was when I played in this very tiny scholarship audition in Columbus. It was just at some random church. Like I couldn't even tell you more about it. I don't know. And my mom said I almost didn't go because she was saying I was kind of tired, and we almost didn't go to it. But I ended up playing, and one of the people who was the jury for the scholarship competition ended up being Keith Robinson, who is an amazing cellist, He plays at CMS
Right.
here at Lincoln Center, and he's Sharon Robinson's brother.
Right.
And so he ended up reaching out to my teacher at the time and saying, I think your student is like really gifted and needs to meet my brother-in-law, Jamie Laredo, because he's coming to CIM that fall. So it was like a crazy amount of timing as well. And it just so happened that my teacher was also leaving Ohio that year.
Oh, wow.
Not that I wouldn't have left necessarily otherwise, but it just like really made it like a necessary transition point anyways.
Like a very clear path.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I was like 13 and that June, my parents took me up to Cleveland. I remember I met Joel Smirnoff and Mr. Laredo and Joan Kwan.
Right.
And I ended up, playing for them. I remember in the audition, I played the Mendelssohn first movement, and then I think I played the second to last movement of the D minor Bach partita.
Yeah.
And they told me to play it without repeats. So I started it, and then I got to the repeat, and I just froze. And I turned to them, I was like, what's the next note? And then I think Mr. Laredo saying, C, like an E. And then I kept going. I was like, oh, thank you. And afterwards, I was like, oh, like, why did I do that? But it ended up being great. And I studied with Mr. Laredo through my high school years. And I ended up skipping my senior year of high school because I basically just graduated early. In my junior year, he told me, I think it'd be really great for you to be like in more of a musical environment that's immersive. You should come here and study with me full time. So I actually didn't end up auditioning anywhere for undergrad. I just went straight to CIM after 3 years of studying with Mr. Laredo and Miss Kwan. So that was really kind of the turning point, because I think even all that time, I know I loved violin. I was going to Meadowmount in the summer times, which was also, that felt like Hogwarts for string players. And, I have such good memories of being there, but it just never really came down to like the choosing moment until Mr. Laredo told me that. And then I was sort of sent further on this journey that I'm still on now. And I've definitely come to terms over time with how much agency I had or not in making those choices. Because I do think as a younger person, you don't really know what the world's about. And even today, like sometimes I'm walking around New York City and I'm just like, there's so much out there in the world. Like I can't even begin to imagine so many other people's lives, so many other people's choices, like where they came from, what's next for them. And, it's overwhelming in a way, but nice to zoom out from my own experience. But that's kind of like how I got more serious about music.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious, so was the teacher that you were with before Mr. Laredo, was that your first teacher?
I had a Suzuki teacher for 1 year, and then I studied with my teacher from 8 years old till like 13. Jun Kim was his name, and he was an assistant of Dr. Yim, who was an assistant of Dorothy DeLay, formerly. But I was kind of his only student. It's not like I had a studio from like 8 to 13 years old. I would just go to his apartment for lessons. And,
so 1 year of Suzuki study. So do you remember that at all? Like, was it just how long?
I do.
How many books did you go through? And
I think I stopped at around book 5. That's when I transitioned to my other teacher, and then we switched to just concertos and other things. I remember getting stickers. The stickers were cool. The floor mat was cool. I remember I dropped my violin in a lesson. That was bad. And my brother made fun of me incessantly. But I think I just accidentally let it go and it fell straight on the floor and the bridge came off and I was terrified. And my teacher let me play her violin for the rest of the lesson, but it was a huge full size. So I was like barely able to reach. And my brother was like, haha, don't drop her violin too. And then I cried again, of course.
Oh my gosh.
That's what I remember about Suzuki.
Okay, so and then you moved to Mr. Laredo's. Wow. So I mean, just moving forward a little bit, because you've obviously studied with some incredible teachers along your journey now, but I want to talk a little bit about your time at NEC, where you recently finished your studies. So you studied with both Don Weilerstein and Soovin Kim, two of the great teachers especially in our country right now. Can you share with us some of the things that you gained from studying with the both of them, and like what all they've imparted into your musical life?
Yeah, I mean, I think I really became so much more of the violinist I am today after going to NEC. I think I had a lot of identity as a musician when I was at CIM.
Sure.
But I think I didn't ever really fully unpack how to play violin yet. I think it was really like a maturity thing.
Sure.
I think everyone who you're around and who's educating you also, of course, plays a part in that. But at NEC, both the surroundings and my teachers really gave me the opportunity to like just dive in fully. And so it was 2019 fall when I went to NEC. So by that spring already it was COVID and things went somewhat online for the rest of that semester. But NEC was really lucky to be back in person, at least for lessons and chamber music by the fall. So it was like as little interruption as you could imagine, despite it being COVID, which was really lucky. But I think the nice thing was Soovin Kim, my teacher, or one of my teachers, was around a lot more, I think, because of COVID. I mean, Soovin's one of like the busiest people I know, and I think he gives so much everywhere he is. But I think it meant a lot to have the in-person time with him at that point. But yeah, both he and Don. I mean, Soovin studied with Don back at CIM when he was in his late teens, early 20s. And he also studied with Mr. Laredo at Curtis.
Okay.
So there's actually just a lot of lineage teacher-wise there. And Mr. Weilerstein and Mr. Laredo went to Meadowmount together back in the days. Mr. Laredo told me this hilarious story. I think Mr. Glamian, like when Mr. Glamian ran Meadowmount, he and Mrs. Glamian put a lot of thought into whose rooms would be next to who, like who would inspire who for practicing. And I think Mr. Laredo was known to perhaps practice less than Mr. Weilerstein. So they put Mr. Weilerstein and Mr. Laredo next to each other. And Mr. Laredo told me, like, I still remember him driving me absolutely crazy with his Beethoven concerto.
Oh my God.
Like every rhythm imaginable, he was just going through every cycle. But it was really nice to like continue in that Glamian tradition, especially with Mr. Weilerstein, because he studied with Glamian at Juilliard. And he'd sometimes bring him up in like studio class or lessons, but I like to contrast Soovin and Don by saying Soovin is very thoughtful and Don is very mindful. Yeah, I think lessons with Mr. Weilerstein often weren't even really about playing necessarily. It was much more about like how are you existing with the music on a spiritual level and on a physical level, but that had to be related to your mental. And, you know, I think people often like to make light of like, oh, the third eye, or, you know, this kind of, he often uses language that might seem a little bit lofty or just like hard, a little abstract. But I think when you're really immersing yourself in that language and really hearing over and over again, like the principles of like, you know, feeling the energy come up from the ground, like really always being grounded in your music making, like playing from your core. How does the sound travel through space? Like you want this like spiraling, energetic sound. I think it really starts impacting the way that you communicate to others about what you're looking for in terms of sound. And I think he also really helped me untangle like some physical tension I still had by the time I went to NEC. So I'm really grateful to him for that. And both Mr. Weilerstein and Mr. Kim are both like the kindest, most understanding people. I've always found myself really drawn to mentors that I want to model as people. And in that sense, I think Soovin is someone who's been incredibly he's been so caring towards me as a student, and I feel so grateful to him. I think he's demonstrated so much just attention and time and care for like my journey, even after leaving NEC. And we co-teach some students at NEC Prep together, which is also a really meaningful extension of being his student. But I think I really appreciated in Soovin's lessons how he got sometimes, like he was very thoughtful. Like I think he was a little more okay with taking something objectively and just like saying one thing that would then kind of land in a certain way with me that changed my mind about something. Like I remember early on we were talking about intonation. I got to NEC, and I mean it's not like I play perfectly in tune now, but I was mostly playing sharp. Like that was my tendency. I think even going to like Aspen in the summer times when undergrad at CM, he was like, you know, you play a little right. And I was like, okay. So I like knew from many different sources that was my issue. I was like, I need to fix this. And Soovin was like, instead of thinking that you need to play flatter, why don't you just play in tune? And as much as that doesn't sound like it would be helpful, something about that was actually very helpful to me, in the sense that, like, I think some things are just a commitment decision.
Yeah.
Like, you have to commit to holding yourself to a higher level and then staying there at that level of, like, self-commitment to a new standard. And of course, that's not necessarily always teachable. But I think having someone who asks that standard of you is really important. And sometimes that's the best thing a teacher can do, is just to say, I know you're capable. You should think you are too. And so I think with Soovin, I've really appreciated both how understanding he is, but also how honest he is as a teacher. And Mr. Laredo as a teacher, he was just full of wanting to give you confidence in your own decisions while making sure what you're deciding is convincing. But I really always appreciated that about him.
Something you mentioned early on was just, you understood that you did a lot of growing up when you got to NEC. And I think that's something that people kind of lose track of, because, as musicians, we think so much about just the music and just the technical aspect of things. But a lot of our music is developed as we develop as people. And I've even heard people that weren't musicians that observed performances say, like, oh, like, I can really tell how a person, like, what kind of a person someone is by just how they perform. And I think that really does ring true in many ways, where, like, we bear ourselves on stage, and, like, it's not just the music, it's who we are as people that we share on stage. So
most definitely. I think that's the hard thing, is when you're putting yourself in the state to be vulnerable in sharing, how do you remain, like, emotionally open while still trying to execute at the highest possible level? And that takes, like, a very fine-tuned, like, sculpting of both where you're soft, emotionally, and where you're really confident and, like, unwavering about certain things, because it needs to happen a certain way in the moment, no matter what you're trying to convey. It's crazy what we do. I think sometimes I think as I get older, I realize how much I take music for granted, or I have, because I just grew up around it. I was never really in a situation where I didn't hear music. If anything, silence is more jarring to me. Especially now living in New York.
Right.
You don't really get quiet much, but I think it's truly one of the best resources we have to, like, share stories and to connect with people. So if anything, like, that makes me feel really lucky to be pursuing music still, and, like, wanting to make this my work for life.
It's your life. It's not even, it's beyond work at this point. So so moving forward a little bit, you have an extensive history of playing chamber music. Even at CIM, you did all the big chamber programs like APTP, and I believe you did, like, IQS, and so it's obviously a big priority for you, and every season you commit to a lot of chamber music concerts. What do you enjoy most about chamber music, and what are some things that you've taken from chamber music back into your own individual playing?
I can definitely trace my love for chamber music back to Ohio. I think I grew up doing chamber music, Columbus, CMC. Chamber Music Connection. My bad. Chamber Music Connection, and it's this program for, like, elementary through high schoolers, run by Debbie Price, and it's an amazing resource for kids in the Columbus area to start doing chamber music. And it was just so fun for me. I think especially once I started practicing more, I didn't really get time to socialize with my friends from school that much, and so getting to do chamber music or youth orchestra, which I didn't end up doing that long, but I did chamber music longer in high school. That was really my time to socialize and, like, be with my friends. So that was also, I think, at that time, why I really enjoyed it. And then I think the repertoire in chamber music, like, as I've gotten older, it's only been something I want to spend more time with. I love concertos, but I think there's something really special about getting to put together, like, 3 or 4 voices, and have everyone bring their own opinions to the table and, like, find ways to combine them. I think that's really beautiful. I think NEC, well, I should say before I get to NEC, the Cavani Quartet were very much a part of the CMC program at Columbus and at CIM, actually.
Okay, I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah. So I knew the Cavani Quartet before I went to CIM, and then of course, the Cavanis being at CIM.
Yeah.
It's just such a joyful part of what the curriculum was. Like, how could you not love doing it? And then it's weird. I followed Mary Peckham, the former cellist of Cavani, to NEC, where she was the director of chamber music there. So I got to coach with Mary. I occasionally would play in her class where she's teaching chamber music pedagogy. And I think chamber music at NEC was also like a very heavily emphasized in a really positive way. And, Mr. Weilerstein and Soovin are both excellent chamber musicians. And Mr. Weilerstein has all those brilliant Cleveland quartet recordings. And we both, I'm sure, were lucky enough to be with Peter Soloff at CIM. So, again, it's kind of like that lineage thing where you're just surrounded by this amazing wealth of like just family, musical family. And inspiration. So I think just being around all those people, I loved it. And to be honest, I think when I got older, I also just realized more and more. I mean, I did some competitions, but I never really loved the feeling of being on stage alone. Or not to say that being a soloist requires more ego, but I think you need a certain level of like confidence and energy that's a little different than a chamber music performance. And I always felt like I could actually just play more like myself and play better in a group setting. And it's funny because I remember I was discussing this with Soovin in a lesson, and he said, well, everyone is different. He was like, I can honestly say the opposite. He was like, I love being on stage alone. Like, he was like, I'm happiest playing Paganini or solo Bach because I can make all the choices and I don't have to respond to anything anyone else does. I was like, wow, we really are different. So clearly, I think everyone has things that suit them better or worse, but I think I always feel less pressure in a good way when I'm on stage with other people, and I have more fun. And I also just enjoy the rehearsal process. I like tuning things with other people. Like, that sounds really nerdy, but I find that to be like zen. And I think I just find getting to play with other people, especially when they're just incredible musicians, and I feel lucky to be working with people like that right now. To be just inspired by how they play, what their sound is, how they phrase something, and like often when I'm alone practicing, I'll be like, how would so and so play this? I've been around enough people that I have I feel like a dictionary of different ways to play things in my head that I could call back on. And I think going to Marlboro for 2 summers was also a really huge part of like further exploring really high level chamber music, and that's obviously its own whole tradition. But it's a powerful thing to get to explore repertoire in such a deep way. And I feel really lucky that I get to do both a lot of chamber orchestra playing now, chamber music playing at various festivals, and with Boston Chamber Music Society. That's probably like my most consistent like relationship growing place after NEC, and like returning and playing with the same people a couple times throughout the year is really, really special. Like, we're going to be finishing the Brahms piano quartet cycle actually at BCMS this spring. Awesome. So if there's any Boston people, come here, Brahms C minor. I think that's going to be in May next year in Boston. But it's I think I learned so much. That's what I love. I always love learning, so it feels really rewarding to be. I'm at an age still where I'm usually the youngest or one of the younger people in the room, and I really appreciate the opportunity to gain wisdom from other people's experience and what they bring to the music.
Right. Yeah. Well, and chamber music has been such a big topic with most of my guests, and they all kind of echoed what you mentioned about like just the interpersonal relationships and the connections you make that way. And I think what's great about chamber music is it's basically a melting pot of knowledge, kind of like what you alluded to earlier, where you're not just taking like the feedback of your colleagues that you're working with, but just the knowledge that they were instilled by their teacher. So it's like if you have a group of 3 or 4 people, it's really like you're gaining the knowledge of like 10 to 12 other people's knowledge, like wisdom. So there's a lot of just wonderful things that happen with that. And I really love, or I agree with what you mentioned about like it's so much more comforting to know that you're going on stage with other people, especially if they're people you like, as opposed to like trying to go up on stage by yourself. It sounds very daunting to me. But
yeah. I mean, I think the saying, the sum is greater than. Wait, is that right? Yeah, the sum is greater than the parts.
Yeah,
something
exactly.
like that. We both don't know the phrase.
Sorry, that's
I think that really applies for chamber music, and I think I just love the repertoire also. I mean, there's so much chamber music that I'm excited to get to play this year, but I'm so excited that there's so much out there, and both contemporary and traditional rep, I think, is just great to experience. I've also just loved getting to go hear more music. I've tried to make an effort to go to more concerts while being in New York City, and it's still a goal of mine for this year. But like live music really is something special. I think there's an energy to it that's like imparted on the audience, and any live sharing of anything between a performer and their audience is really, it's a special, like almost sacred moment of some kind.
Well, I think we were reminded of that with COVID when we didn't have live music, and then we got to come back to it, and it was a nice change. So, segueing into a big part of your life right now, you are currently a fellow at for Ensemble Connect through Carnegie Hall, which is fantastic. For those that may not be familiar, can you share with us a little bit about what this fellowship looks like and the kind of work you guys do?
Yeah, so Ensemble Connect is a fellowship designed by Carnegie Hall and like co-sponsored by Juilliard. And it focuses a lot on chamber music, community outreach, and education. So there are 14 fellows in our current class. It's a 2-year program. Every class is totally new people. So there's actually going to be auditions this upcoming spring. And it's really trying to get the like next leaders of classical music to apply, and they really give us a lot of resources to think about how to have creative careers. I think of course some people from Ensemble Connect go on to have like really amazing orchestral jobs. A lot of people stay in New York and freelance. A lot of people end up teaching, but there's just so many different ways that music can be used, and I think they just want to open our eyes to that. We're each partnered with a New York City public school. I'm working with the Frank Sinatra School of the Arts in Queens, and they're an amazing high school with performing arts students. So I've really enjoyed getting to go there. I was actually just there for my first visit yesterday, so it was really nice to see all the kids and my partner teacher. And so we do about a little over 20 visits per year at our partner school. And we go around to the different schools and do these things called interactive performances, which are carefully crafted, usually scripted shows that take audiences through a selection of music. Usually there's 4 to 5 people in a group. So it's chamber music esque, and it's a show where hopefully the audience is brought in and shown the music through a very specific lens, where they're able to interact with the music in a slightly deeper way than they would if we just played it for them without saying anything. So the idea is to be as it's called, an interactive performance. Usually we involve the audience either in like saying things out loud, clapping. They're asked to offer their own opinions. Sometimes we create a story with them, or they help us compose something. It really depends on the show, but I've actually found that to be one of the most valuable things we've done at Ensemble Connect, just because it really does make you think, wow, the way you present a piece of music and the way you talk about it or share it with the audience outside of the playing really matters. Because there's a lot we assume as musicians. I think there's a lot of knowledge we already have just from our training or from being around other musicians that we assume often too much about what normal people would think. So it's been really nice to do that. And we also go around to other community venues like shelters, prisons, hospitals. It really depends. And the other component of Ensemble Connect is chamber music. And so we play roughly like once every month at Carnegie or Juilliard. There's usually a pretty diverse program, a lot of contemporary music, a lot of the old classics as well. And we're actually going to Spain, to Madrid, this November for a partnership residency. with both the art museum there and the Reina Sofia, which should be fun.
Yeah.
So really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ensemble Connect's been great. It's definitely sort of like a part-time job, I would say. Some weeks are busier than others.
Sure.
It definitely goes in cycles. But yeah, I'm excited, and the time has been flying fast. It's crazy to believe we're already in the second year. But excited for the new class to come in the year after.
Yeah. Well, and I love what you shared with us about like kind of putting on these shows to make it more interactive with the audience, because I think one of the biggest critiques that non-musicians make about classical music, even to this day, unfortunately, is just how daunting it is to even go to a concert, because there's so many little etiquettes that you may or may not know going into a concert, and it's like, well, like, how am I supposed to enjoy something if I can't really know for sure what I'm getting out of it? So the fact that you guys are doing these shows, or concerts that make it to where the audience members are able to really interact, and that's really, I think that's such a wonderful thing, and it really should, more organizations should be doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really like basic things such as like don't ask yes or no questions to the audience. Like don't ask something that has a correct answer or not, because you don't want to make the audience feel like they don't know the right thing already. Like you don't want to turn people off from what you're trying to share with them before you start playing your music. But like a really interesting example would be, I mean, this wasn't even through Ensemble Connect, but I was thinking about it over the summer, because a lot of musical organizations are doing more outreach concerts now, which I think is great. But now I've seen a couple where I'm in situations and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I think we should do it this way, because it's like I would slightly alter what we're doing. But I saw an example of a situation where someone was asking a lot of like answers with correct questions. It felt like a quiz, and the kids were kind of like getting quieter and quieter and like withdrawing a little bit. And then I tried to just say, we ended up talking about acoustics, and I was like, I'd love to see some hands. Who can tell me what the best acoustic in your house is? Because everyone has a different answer, but all of them are like an expert of their own house, and they were all actually so excited to talk about it. So they were like, my hallway, or like the dining room has wood floors. And I think just giving kids an opportunity to realize that they already interact with sound, they already have such an awareness of the sounds that are around them, and to like make them just tune into that more often. Like that's honestly the best thing I could try and ask for as someone coming into their lives for 40 minutes to share some music, just to reintroduce it as something that isn't that inaccessible to them.
And the other thing that you mentioned that I just absolutely love, just the overall, or the overarching mission to reach out to communities. And that's something that I think the Cavanis really did so beautifully at CIM. Just as a participant of chamber music at CIM, you were, I don't want to say required, you were given the opportunity to perform an outreach performance at the end of the semester. And I think that's such a pivotal part of all musicians' lives, or it should be, because again, I think we don't want to be on some like pedestal as a musician. It's like we need to be able to like make ourselves and our music accessible to people that otherwise may not have that in their lives, right? So
exactly.
With what you're doing, and again, like I can't emphasize my love for the Cavanis enough, because I think they really were so great and passionate about just making themselves available to the community. So that's
most definitely
very admirable.
I feel like there's as I've gotten older and gotten to meet more musicians, I think there's a big difference between people who are great musicians and people who are both great musicians and great educators. And I can honestly say that the Cavanis fell into that second category, because not everyone is able to share what they know in a way that's like generous or in good spirit. I've definitely seen examples of people like not being so nice to students, or maybe just sharing what they know but in a really unfortunate way. I think it's great to be good at what you do, and that doesn't mean you have to be like an a-hole about it. Exactly. We all know people like that. But I've come to really believe through my own mentors and seeing the other students that study with my teachers that like you can be the kindest person and also help your students grow.
And just one more thing, just because with like outreach concerts. My mom was a pianist, and so and like very young, like my brother was a violinist, and so she would organize these like holiday concerts at like different nursing homes every year, and I just always like that was such a big part of my life. And honestly, like what I loved about that is just like how grateful the audience members were, because obviously if you go to a nursing home, they're at a stage in life where they're not able to go to concerts. So to bring concerts and music to them, it just means so much more for all of us, I think, than just giving concerts at a hall or something. So yeah, there's just something very meaningful about that.
It can be such a different relationship between the audience and the performer than a concert hall space, for sure. Another thing I think that Ensemble Connect teaches us is like not to assume anything about the audience, because I think sometimes you just don't know who's in that room. I'm not saying it would be someone who's necessarily an expert, but you don't know what someone already knows. There was this really crazy incident where last year my interactive performance group went to this NYU Child Hospital downtown, and we only played for like 3 or 4 kids right in front of us, but they were broadcasting it to the kids in the wards, which was nice. But one of the kids there was this really excited kid. He loved violin, and at the end he was like, "Can you play something fast?" And so for whatever reason, I decided to start Paganini 16 and did like maybe 15 seconds of it. And he was like, "I know that song." And I was like, "What? You're like 12." Like, I didn't say that, but and he was like, "Paganini Caprice 16." And he literally named it, which was insane, because I would never have looked at this kid and imagined that he would know the Paganini Caprices. But yeah, you just never actually know who's there. And so just, always presenting things hopefully in a way that's like both making music accessible, but never making the audience also feel like they don't know anything. Because I think there's a lot people do know already about music, and like tapping into that and like prior knowledge is so important. And that makes people, I mean, any conversation, people like feeling like they understand where you're coming from and what you're talking about and how it relates to them. That's what people enjoy about other people.
Exactly. Yeah, that's wonderful. And so moving forward a little bit, I want to talk about a different facet or aspect of your life. You're currently on faculty, like you alluded to before, at NEC's preparatory school, where you work with the next generation of great musicians. Can you talk a little bit or share with us about your teaching philosophy and how you go about working with any given student?
Well, I feel really, really lucky to be on faculty at NEC Prep. Actually, full disclosure, decided to take 1 year off this year, just so that people aren't confused, because the commute to Boston every week, in addition to finishing up Ensemble Connect, was like a lot last year for my schedule. And it just makes more sense both for me and for the students for me to like be able to resume the teaching process after this year. But anyways, NEC and teaching. I am lucky to have really wonderful students at NEC Prep. Most of them are from the Walnut Hill School of the Arts. And so they're kids who are pretty seriously like pursuing a conservatory track for their college years. And I think it's just really inspiring to get to work with kids that age. I think someone between the ages of 13 and 18 is learning so much about who they are as a human. They're learning so much about growing up, their relationships with other people, how they want to organize their time. So a lot of the lessons, I think, I try to make the lessons both about how to be a good violinist and a good musician, but also how can you apply what we're talking about to outside of just your lesson, because I think the skills you build as a musician don't have to be limited to music. Like you can take time management into any part of your life. You can take how you make a decision musically into a different part of your life. And I'd like to think I'm not a mean teacher, but I think I'm honest. I think that's an important part of being someone that kids trust. Because I think kids know when stuff doesn't sound good. And if you pretend otherwise, that makes them distrust your words to them. But at the same time, I like to think that, again, I think being a good teacher means setting the right expectation. I think it would be silly to have the same expectation for every student, because everyone's at such a different place. But setting the bar just high enough and being honest with them and asking them to be honest with themselves about what is a reach for you. Like, what can we do this week? What can we do today to get closer to this goal? What does that process look like throughout the week? Like, how do you build on what you've accomplished yesterday? Like, making sure that we really break down how to practice too, because I think at that stage when you're a young student, that's really kind of a mystery.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, if you're told to go practice for 4 hours,
Yeah.
I don't know, there's a lot of different ways to go.
Exactly.
So I tried to really unpack that as well, but I think really making sure that a student is confident in what they're doing also is important. Like, even if a student's playing something under tempo, I'll tell them, pick a tempo you feel confident about playing. Like, I want to hear what you want to say through this music still, even if you're playing it under tempo. And just always trying to keep alive that feeling of, like, this is your music. I want to know what you think, and you need to be making choices already at this point. I'm not a fan of spoon feeding. I don't really believe in that, because I was never really given a spoon-fed experience. So I actually kind of rejected that whenever I would meet teachers that wanted to, like, give me a refingering or tell me to crescendo here, and like this is the pinnacle of the phrase. I would often kind of ask why. Maybe, and it's funny because I think not everyone has like the same kinds of musical intuitions. Like, some people are way more musical, whatever that means, but and some people are more like comfortable playing fast music that's very fiery, whereas like a slow phrase confuses them. So, I think just meeting a student where they're at, making sure I want them to acknowledge their strengths. I've asked students before also, like at the beginning of a school year, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses as a player? Because it's important to know both, so that you know what you can feel really good about right now. And just, I think, self-awareness. I mean, these are all things that I've honestly enjoyed thinking about for myself also as I talk to them. But I also learned so much from the students, because I often like to ask them, I hear a lot of Mr. Weilerstein come out of me, honestly, when I teach, because I think I really enjoyed his dialogue with students. I maybe try to be a little bit more specific sometimes than he is with physical instructions, just because I think students of a certain age need a little bit more like directness. But something about the way that he would ask, like, what about that worked for you, and asking a student to like then say out loud why something was better is really important. Like, having that moment of reflection is really, really key. So sorry, that was kind of an all over the place answer, but
that was great.
I feel like there's so many things about teaching that I love, and I've grown so much as a player. Even though, like, let's say last year was like an incredibly busy and kind of stressful schedule for me, and I wasn't actually getting to practice that much of my own music, I think the teaching time really gave me that moment every week to focus in on like what I believe are important principles as a player, and just saying those things out loud, demonstrating it a little bit, and just re-emphasizing for both the student and myself what are the key principles, both physically and like mentally. Was just a huge help to me as well. So I'm grateful for my students, and it's amazing to see how much they grow.
Well, and I love what you mentioned about just being honest with your students, because I think, especially with our current climate in society, so just socially speaking, I think a lot of people are very easily just, it's easy for them to want to just sugarcoat things to people, at the risk of like, or in the fear of like, offending someone maybe. And so, which is totally valid, and we're making progress in that sense. But at the same time, if you're not honest with students, then you're really doing a disservice to their growth, because you're not really giving them the right insight and tools. And so, I mean, I think that's such a wonderful thing that you do, in terms of just always evaluating things with your students on a micro and macro level, and just showing them like, this is what you got to do. So that's awesome.
I mean, the reality is, as a teacher, and I mean, this goes for whether you're the one being the student, like, you only get 1 hour roughly a week with your teacher, and the rest of the time they're on their own, or you're on your own in the practice room. And so I think as a teacher, I was really trying to impart, like, what are the things you need to think about when you're alone this week? And I learned also that you really can't say more than a few things per lesson. Like, I mean, you could say 10 different things they can work on, but the likelihood that they remember all 10 is minimal. So I think just picking like 2 or 3 of the biggest things that need to be fixed, and like repeating it over and over again in different ways and like tying different things back to that gives it a much bigger chance of improving for the next week.
Well, and I think the other thing I really loved about what you said is how you reflect in your teaching Mr. Weilerstein in terms of just the dialogue, because I remember in my time in Cleveland, studying with Melissa Kraut, every lesson it was like I would play and then she would just start with, asking questions basically. And looking back, I think she did that because she knew I wasn't really good at practicing. And so just asking these questions just constantly just allowed for me to like ask my own questions when I practice. And I think as a teacher, that one of the best things you can do is to hopefully get your students to be able to teach themselves. And I think, having the dialogue just, and again, like you said, it's unfortunate that, and I think it's getting better, but there are teachers still that are just very like, you got to do it this way, you got to, and you're like spoon feeding things. And again, like that might be good in the short term, but long term, like how much growing are you able to do in that kind of environment, So,
right. Yeah. I've definitely seen a lot of friends that I grew up with that I think maybe were given a lot more spoon feeding, and I feel like that only works up to a point.
Exactly.
And when you're expected to think for yourself or like really be hearing yourself, like listening really, really carefully, that's when it's, that's not good enough anymore. And I would hate to give students tools that limited them like 5 years from now. So I think just trying to give people the skills they can grow with and continue developing like their whole lives. That's what I feel lucky to have received from my teachers and what I want to pass on to the students I get to work with.
And I mean, just the other thing is like, I think when you spoon feed, it's like, it leads to just very like rudimentary, like a very rudimentary outlook on music in some ways, where it's like, I've worked with people in the past where we'd be in a chamber music setting and, we'd be talking and it's like, oh, someone would say like, oh, like there's a crescendo or, oh, there's a retardando here, so we should do it. And it's like, I don't love those kind of discussions because more than anything, it should be more about like, okay, what is the meaning behind that crescendo? Or like, what did the composer really want to do with that? And so that kind of dialogue is way more interesting than just saying like, hey, there's a crescendo there, or hey, there's a piano there. It's like, well, not all mezzo pianos are created equal, right? Like there's different meanings behind each marking. So I think, you just having that intuition, or it's not even intuition, it's just the curiosity, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. Building that curiosity, I think, is like the best gift you could give a student.
Yes.
Because that's what's going to get them farther every week on their own. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah. So moving forward a little bit, or I guess back to 2021, you were an artist fellow for Alone Together, an educational project led by the great violinist Jennifer Coe. What all did this fellowship entail, and what did you gain from this experience?
Yeah, it was a really kind of random thing I found online that she was doing. I think I got an email from Young Arts, and then I applied through that because Jennifer Coe commissioned, I want to say it's 36 short works by composers during the COVID lockdown, because composers didn't have much to do at that point. I mean, no one really did, but especially composer, I think she wanted to give people a reason to focus on their art and like channel what we were all going through. And so the following springtime, she selected 5 young people. I was one of the 5 to be part of this roughly 2 to 3 week Zoom seminar session in, I think it was June 2021. And we got to do Zoom sessions with these amazing composers who wrote some of these works, like Duyan, Missy Mazzoli, Tanya Leon. So I got to play each of the pieces for them on Zoom, meet them, and Jennifer would conduct a conversation with these amazing composers. And just the generosity, I think, of both Jennifer and all of her colleagues that she was bringing on. And I think she really just kind of opened the door to like, this is what collaborating in music looks like. That was such a powerful thing. And it was amazing because like I met Tanya Leon through that. And then this past spring, I got to play one of Tanya's works at Carnegie because she was curating our Ensemble Connect up close show in March. So just to have met her again in a different context, she remembered me from, the Alone Together seminar. That was really special. And I think Jennifer is someone who's really a trailblazer in that she cares a lot about stories.
Yeah.
As an artist, I think she wants to share the stories that have not been told.
Yeah.
I think she wants to share hard stories also. And so I think to see someone that's really passionate about that, and also just such a fantastic violinist. She also studied with Mr. Laredo before, so just to be a little bit closer to someone who I admire so much meant a lot. And I think just seeing, I think also as a woman, like a really strong, powerful, like female voice, and both as a violinist and a person, to show that you can be both thoughtful and inquisitive, but strong, like sensitive to like all the hurt that there is in the world, but also to not only be a caretaker, but to be like a fighter about it. I think that was really powerful to me, just as an example. Even if I'm not necessarily like going to fill that same role, I think just to know that she's out there doing that is very inspiring for me and other young musicians.
Well, and I think, with Jennifer Coe, what's so inspiring is, like you mentioned before, she is very open to opening herself up, I guess, or being vulnerable, because I've seen in interviews where she shared some tough moments in life. And I just think, again, as we evolve and grow as people, it's important to remember that being vulnerable doesn't mean weak. It actually, in a way, in many ways, represents strength, to be able to be vulnerable and to open yourself up in that way. So I think she's, like you mentioned before, she's such a trailblazer in many ways. So,
I love how you said that. That's beautiful, because I think those moments of vulnerability, or like those pockets, are often where people can connect the most.
Exactly.
But it does take one person at least being open to sharing that part of themselves first for two people to get there. Yeah.
That was great. So moving to something slightly lighter, because I want to pick your brain about many aspects of your life and just your different preferences. We're going to segue to our quarter note question segment. So I'm really curious to hear what you have for us here. So the first thing is, since you've lived in both cities now, Boston or New York City?
Ooh, I think if you're going to go to school, Boston. If you want to live your 20s and 30s, New York. But I think I would probably rather live in Boston if I have a family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That was a very nuanced answer. I like it.
So both, but at different times.
Yeah. You're appeasing both crowds right now. Okay, I like
can't
it.
choose.
Okay. What's your favorite restaurant in New York?
That's really hard. I mean, I have to say a go-to that I will always keep going back to is ROKC.
Okay.
It's near like 142, I want to say, on Broadway.
Oh, okay.
And it's a ramen, oyster kitchen, and cocktails.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just an amazing sort of Japanese fusion underground-ish bar. So very fun menu. And I got to see one of my favorite celebrities there last year. If any of you are Marvelous Mrs. Maisel fans, I literally was sitting next to Rachel Brosnahan and her husband.
Oh, wow.
For like an hour. And then the bartender brought over whiskey shots just because it was a random Tuesday night and he felt like it. And so I literally clinked glasses with Rachel Brosnahan at ROKC.
That's amazing.
So, has to be my favorite.
Yeah. You can always take that with you.
Yeah, that was a New York moment.
Yeah. Very early on in your New
It was
York,
like just a week after I moved here, pretty much.
Wow, and just like, yeah.
I was like, I guess you just sit next to celebrities at dinner.
Yeah, your expectations are just that high now every time.
That hasn't happened again.
Yeah. One country you hope to visit someday?
I would have to say the Czech Republic.
Okay.
Yeah, I really want to see Prague.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dvorak, is that, or what?
I do actually really like Czech music. Yeah, I like Janacek, Smetana, Dvorak. But I think I just have heard a lot about the history of that city, and I think it's one of the lesser. I mean, it's definitely still a tourist destination, but like less than Paris or something, or Rome,
or Vienna, Berlin.
Yeah. I feel like there's just a lot of like inner history in Prague.
Yeah, so true. Dogs or cats?
Cats.
Cats? Okay, that's fair. Glass half full or half empty?
I would say I'm a glass half full person,
Okay.
but I do like to think about refills.
So,
you know,
you want
what
it to
else
be
can
completely
fill that
full.
glass?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very glass half full. I like it. Yeah. Early morning or late night practice?
Lately, honestly, more late night practice.
Okay.
I think it's probably mostly also just due to my schedule right
Yeah.
now. It's hard to have time to practice enough in the morning, and I don't want to wake up my neighbors.
Sure.
But I think everyone in my apartment hasn't minded the late night practice. So
That's good. You're like serenading them to bed, right?
yeah, I use a practice game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Favorite meal after a performance?
That's a tough one. I honestly am pretty bad at eating like the whole day I perform.
Yeah.
I'm not like I'm in general, like I like food, but
Yeah.
I'm not the best at like making myself eat if I'm nervous or just finished
Yeah.
playing. So
Yeah.
I'll actually probably just put question mark on
Mm,
that.
yeah, I will say, yeah, I think a lot of people just kind of get very like superstitious about eating right before a concert. So
Oh
like,
yeah, definitely not before.
Yeah.
I mean, after I'll always go for like some good fries or
Yeah,
something.
that's always
But yeah, just something like tasty but not too heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say nothing too heavy.
Do you at least take like a banana with you backstage before a concert?
Depends.
Yeah.
Either like like a Cliff Bar or banana. Yeah, something easy to eat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Favorite genre of music that's not classical?
Ooh, I really like people like Doja Cat and Beyonce. I also like New Jeans.
Oh,
yeah, K-pop.
Yeah.
I just feel like anything that's a little more upbeat,
Yeah.
and I really like feminine voices.
Sure.
I just in general listen to more female singers.
That's fair.
Or only, and it's not even on purpose.
Yeah,
I just noticed that it's all girls
Is
singing.
this just you're gravitated to the female voice?
Yeah.
That's good. Beethoven string quartets or Mendelssohn piano trios?
I'd have to say the Beethoven string quartets, just because there are more of them, and I feel like you could listen to them forever and still find new things.
Yeah, definitely. Favorite Bach sonata or partita?
Ooh,
that's a hard one, right?
That is a hard one. I think I would have to go with the Bach C major.
Okay.
I've actually not spent as much time with that one as some of the others, but I think as a listener, that's the one that I felt myself be the most touched by. I think there was a lot of Bach C major going on in Mr. Weilerstein's studio during COVID, so maybe I also have that association.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Favorite Mozart violin sonata?
Anything played by Arthur Grumio.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think I can pick one. I think they're all delightful.
Yeah.
But Grumio playing any of them is, he's just got this amazing sensibility for both like Mozart and Beethoven. He's like my go-to for those.
And remind me, how he wrote like what, 12 or 14 violin sonatas?
I think they're more than that, like 30 something.
Is it 30? Okay.
I think it's a lot. Okay. Yeah. But not a lot of them are played. Like there's some that are just very commonly played.
Sure. Prokofiev violin concerto 1 or 2?
1.
1?
Yeah. 1.
Okay. That's fair. Favorite Mahler symphony?
Oh. Okay, this is embarrassing. I don't think I've actually ever heard all the Mahler symphonies. I really like the one that has the movements titled like What the Flowers Tell Me, What the Animals Tell Me.
Okay.
I think I want to say that's Mahler 3. Is that right? Or Mahler 2?
Honestly, I'm
it's
not
one
the
of the first 3.
Yeah.
But whichever one that one is, I think that one's incredible. I remember hearing Cleveland Orchestra play it. And that was, I think that's the only time I've heard a Mahler symphony live, actually. I like orchestral pieces, but maybe I'm also a victim of like 21st century attention span, but I think like really long symphonies don't necessarily appeal to me. Although I do like Alpine Symphony, so maybe I just need to give it a chance.
Sure.
I should go actively seek out Mahler symphonies.
Yeah,
now.
well, no, but I think also it's hard for orchestras to program Mahler symphonies because it's so substantial or such just big, right? Like so it takes a lot to make that work. Literally a village. So
literally, yeah. Village and a half.
Right, yeah, seriously, yeah. So running 7 miles or running through all your scales first thing in the morning?
Oof. My roommate is actually really into trying to push me to do longer distances. So we've done like a little over 5 miles.
Okay.
I think I would more regularly want to do all the scales every morning. Like that doesn't sound so bad. But I would want to try doing 7 miles. So maybe I'd do 7 miles once a week and then all the scales the rest of the mornings.
Are you still just committing to the Galamian scales, basically.
Yeah, pretty
Okay,
much. Yeah.
That's kind of the OG.
Exactly. Yeah, keep it OG.
Right. One violinist, dead or alive, that you wish you could meet, or you hope to meet.
Ooh. Honestly, I really love Zeno Francescatti as a player. I don't think he's someone people like list as one of their top violinists often, but in the Art of Violin documentary, I love the scene of him saying, "If I weren't a violinist, I'd be a gardener." And he's saying it, I think, in French. But I think when the host was describing Francescatti, he said he's like the Mediterranean, like he's just the sweetest, most like warm personality. And I think just talking to someone like that about violin playing would make me love the violin even more. Because I mean, his recordings of like Bruch Concerto, like I just don't think there's anything more beautiful than that. So if you haven't listened, take a listen.
My homework for tonight.
No, it's like truly incredible.
One composer, dead or alive, you wish you could meet.
I was thinking about this one earlier, and I mean, there's so many people I'd want to meet. Like honorable mention, Ravel, just because I love his music so much, and I feel like from what I understand, he's a very particular person, and his house is really cool. There's like a YouTube tour of Ravel's house that my mom and I watched together once, while eating breakfast. But it's kind of beautiful. Anyways, I'd be like, "What are your decor choices? Why?" But no, I think for real, the person I want to talk to is Clara Schumann, because I think she was she's kind of like the 21st century woman, but back in the 1800s. Like she has a family, she's working, she has a successful husband, but also her own career, and managed to like juggle all that, especially at a time where that was not so normal, and she wasn't really given support by her parents to do that. Like they did not approve of that. So I think it would just be so interesting to like come from the future and just be like, what is this like for you? Like who do you talk to about what your life is like? Like I just wonder, I don't know, like was Robert really that understanding of what she was actually going through as like a musician and woman? Like did she have other women around her? Like maybe there was this boss woman club we don't know about.
Exactly.
Now I want to go research. I think I'd just be so curious to ask her about that.
She was so ahead of her time, and she's just such a trailblazer in many ways. Sunny or rainy days?
Ooh, if I don't have to go outside, I actually really like rainy days. I think like it usually makes things smell better, and the air like clears up, and just being cozy inside can be really nice. But obviously, like if I'm going outside, sunny days are beautiful.
Just something therapeutic about hearing the rain hit.
The sound of raindrops is very soothing.
Favorite instrument that's not the violin?
Oh, another hard one. This sounds strange, but I feel like maybe it doesn't. I don't know. I honestly would probably have to say trumpet. Like I do think that in orchestral settings, like the moments that trumpets have sometimes as like this victorious or like some kind of call. I find it like electrifying. I don't get to play that often right now with like a full orchestra, so I just really appreciate like going to concerts and hearing like the trumpet player just like blast something out in like the most beautiful way. But also trumpet can be like so intimate, like with the mute and like do these long singing lines. So I think it's a beautiful sound.
Great. Last one. Something you always need with you before performance that's not the violin.
All the people who like curling their eyelashes out there will understand, but an eyelash curler. I like feeling like my eyelashes are lifted. Like I just feel like I'm like more awake. I always have to have an eyelash curler with me before I go on stage.
Well, and I think to that effect, I think as a performer, there is something very integral about just the process of getting in your uniform, for lack of better. It's part of like the mental like preparation of going to perform. It's like
it's like the ritual of like preparing yourself to be in that mindset.
Because like if you didn't have that and you just went on stage, it's almost like you missed a step basically, and it just because that's why I think even with dress rehearsals, even if it's on the same stage you're about to, it doesn't feel necessarily like the performance, because part of it is just you need to wear what you need to wear. So
like the act of getting ready for a concert is honestly what like hypes me up to go
Yeah,
on
yeah,
stage.
yeah.
Oftentimes, you gotta look cute.
Yeah.
Then you look cute even if you sound bad,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
hopefully you don't sound
yeah,
bad.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's that saying? It's like you look good, you feel good, you feel good, you play good, something like
Yeah,
that.
that sounds right to me.
Yeah.
I buy that.
Yeah. Okay, well, this has been so lovely and wonderful and insightful. So before we close, is there or are there? Can you just share with us words of wisdom for our audience, especially the younger ones that may be listening that are trying to cultivate their own passion for music?
That's a really good question. I think, especially if you're a young person today, I think you should always put yourself in situations where people are teaching you how to trust your instincts. I think like seeking out places, that doesn't mean you shouldn't place yourself in challenging situations. I think challenge can often teach you what your instincts are, but I think giving yourself the best, putting yourself in the place where you have the best mentors possible is like your best chance at growth. I think it's such a skill that I think everyone can have to find the people, even if they're your peers, that inspire you, and that you can learn something from and that you enjoy spending time with, because I think the people you're around really do impact your path in life so much. So just be really mindful of who you're around, like what you spend your time thinking about with them, and um, don't. There's not enough time in life for negativity, so try not to put yourself in situations with people who are going to be negative or make you feel negatively. Yeah, I think just really learning to trust what you believe in is important. Like building that taste, building that sense of yourself and what matters to you, because that makes you different also from everyone else, and that's a beautiful thing to pursue and focus on.
Yeah, that's wonderful advice. So Isabelle, thank you so much for just everything that you shared with us, and just your time, most importantly, just your generosity in that. And we look forward to just all the amazing things that are going to continue to come from your work. So thank you so much again.
Thank you, Shenyan. This has been so fun.
Yeah.